Story time! One of our smartest students was expelled and arrested. There were about 3,000 kids in the school and about 700 in his class. He was ranked 67th GPA-wise, which wasn't bad at all. However, this student thought he deserved way more. After all, he needed to be in the top 10 in order to get into the Ivy Leagues he applied to. After sports practice one day, he snuck back into the main building and broke into a few locked classrooms until he found one where a teacher left their laptop. He used the teacher's laptop to hack into the school system database and change his grades. Not only his grades, but his friends' grades too. In total, about 100 grades were changed and all of his and his friends' absences as well. He made himself go from 67th in the class to 7th. Apparently this kid put some type of malware on the teacher computer and then was able to hack into it from the library computer where he volunteered. There weren't any cameras in the library, but because so many of the grades that were changed were his and his rank moved up more than anyone else's, authorities assumed it was him and arrested him. So much for the Ivies. Story time! I usually stay really late after school getting extra work done. Typically stay until about dinner time. When I moved to a new school, it was a little eerie staying so late in an unfamiliar place, but I soon made a friend. We'll call him Tom. Tom was a custodian at the school, and whenever I'd be leaving, he'd be pushing his giant trash can around the hallways, making his rounds. I'd always stop to chat with him. He was such a lovely person, and I genuinely enjoyed catching up with him when I could. One day, my principal called me to her office, and she looked scared, concerned, angry, the whole 9 yards all at once. She showed me an image on her computer and asked if I could explain what was going on. It was an image from the security cameras in the hallway of me and Tom chit-chatting. I was very confused and explained, Tom the custodian and I developed a really nice friendship during our late nights. She asked if I'd watched the news lately, and I said we hadn't installed cable in our new house yet. Apparently, there is no Tom the custodian. There is a Tom the convicted murderer who escaped prison, was hiding and living under the crawl space in the school. I guess he walked around after school looking for extra food before the custodians emptied the trash cans in the morning. Story time. During my planning period, an old student of mine came running through the door panicking. She said their substitute called the police on their class and they needed me immediately. I grabbed all my stuff and rushed to the classroom, finding the sub screeching at students. She was accusing them of stealing the lesson plans for the day because they were clearly lazy bums who didn't want to do any work. I walked in, looked at the teacher desk in the doorway, and saw a folder labeled lesson plans. I interrupted her screeching and said, 1, don't talk to students that way, and 2, are these the lesson plans you're looking for? I guess I caught her off guard because her eyes got big and she froze. Then she grabbed her purse, ran to the back of the room, and hopped out a window. We were on the ground floor, so she didn't really fall, but she sprinted as soon as she got outside. Before we could even process that, 2 officers walked in and asked if anyone called them. The kids and I tried to explain what happened, and they didn't even look surprised. Apparently, this woman really believes this generation of kids are demons from Satan, and if she calls the police on them, they'll just be arrested. So she signs up to sub to get a large group arrested at a time and bolt before the cops show up. And she keeps getting to do it because the demand for subs are so high and the requirements to be one are so low. Story time. We take students to the beach every year with the goal of learning about the ecosystems. It started out really fun, but the last few years have been so traumatic, I don't understand how we're allowed to keep going back. The insane event started about 4 years ago when one of the chaperones got a call in the middle of the trip that her mother passed away. It was so sad, and obviously we were all there for her, and we went back the following year like nothing was wrong. Then that year, one of our teachers dropped dead from a heart attack just in the middle of the day, in front of all the kids. It was so traumatic. I think the trip should have ended forever with that incident, but it didn't. The next year, a teacher had a stroke in the middle of the trip and had to spend a few days in the hospital. And last year, one of our colleagues was murdered right before the trip, and we had to find a different chaperone, because of course we can't cancel. This field trip is clearly cursed. Not only do I not understand why it keeps getting planned, I don't understand why parents keep sending their kids. These trips need to stop. Like, what's gonna happen this year? Story time. Leaving school for an appointment saved my life. A little backstory. I teach AP classes, and one of my students was a valedictorian. We had a final paper due, and the valedictorian plagiarized everything. He received no points for it, and I told him he could redo the assignment, but he wouldn't be able to receive full credit. He flipped out because not earning an A would bump him down to valedictorian, and he was hoping that title would get him into Yale, which he was on the wait list for. I told him he should have thought about that before plagiarizing, and these were the consequences to his actions. A week later, I had a dentist appointment, and I actually signed out of school early to go during my planning period. While I was out, I got a text from my principal saying to stay off campus and not to call him. I had to pass by the school on my way home anyways, and I saw numerous police cars and crowds of parents all outside the school. The student brought a gun to school and knocked on my door during planning. When I didn't answer and the door was locked, he shot the door open, which put the school on code red lockdown. Apparently, he was under the impression that I ruined his life and he wanted to come make me pay, but didn't want to hurt other students, so he came during my planning. When he realized I wasn't there, he panicked, hid in a closet, and hoped the school would just call a false alarm and move on with their day. But they found him and arrested him. In case you're wondering, he didn't get into Yale. Story time. A couple students were almost kidnapped by traffickers on a field trip. Our elementary school was going on a field trip to the zoo. While on the trip, one of our chaperones starts sprinting to the principal, screaming that some of the kids had gone missing and she can't find them. The whole zoo went on lockdown. Everyone leaving was heavily searched, but no one could find the children. The police were called, the parents were called, everyone was panicking. It was so insane. We didn't want to leave the zoo just in case they were playing hide and seek and would come out, or what if they fell into an enclosure and no one noticed? All of a sudden, another group of police officers and a crowd of bikers pulled up to the front of the zoo with the children. Apparently, when the bikers got to the zoo, they saw a couple guys drag some kids from the entrance and shove them into their van. They called the cops and kept following the van to keep tabs on it. The van pulled over for gas, but the cops weren't there yet, so the bikers beat the snot out of the kidnappers, held the kids until the cops got back, and rode back with them to make sure they got back to their parents safe. Turns out the kidnappers were known traffickers, and this led to the cops finding a whole bunch of other missing kids. Story time. You would not believe what this first grader was planning. I was covering for this first grade class, and I told the students to get their pencils out of their backpacks so we could get started. One of the boys in the back just stared at me and had the weirdest look on his face. I knew the family, and he was pretty quiet in general, but something was just off. I prompted him a second time, come on, let's get your stuff out of your backpack, let's get started. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a giant steak knife. I immediately called the office and we separated him from the other students. We searched his backpack and found a hit list which included his regular teacher and a couple students from the room. He said he had a big day planned and the teacher being absent ruined everything for him. He was transferred to another school within the day. Story time! One day, the quiet kid in our class failed his first test ever. That afternoon, he stole the teacher's car, crashed it, and lost both of his legs in the process. A couple of years later, he failed another test and did it all again. Except this time, he stabbed one of the Good Samaritans who tried to help him, and when a second one ran up, he shot him. He then led police on an 8-hour manhunt by detaching his prosthetics and hiding under leaves. The newspapers the next day read, "Armed and legless." He was also expelled from the school. Story time. There's some kind of evil genius at our school. One year around Christmas, all of the mean popular girls were getting little gifts of makeup samples in their lockers. Because this secret Santa, as they called it, was able to get into their lockers, they assumed it was someone in their friend group doing some sweet treat for the holidays. They started wearing their new makeup the next day, and by the end of first period, all of their faces started swelling. The teachers were worried they were having allergic reactions, so they called both the parents and the ambulance. When the makeup was turned in, it was found that the contents of the containers weren't actually makeup, and a lot of the liquids contained traces of poisonous liquids. Someone literally tried to poison the school mean girls, and to this day, we have no idea who. Story time. The year of the Stoneman Douglas shooting, a lot of families within our county were getting weird flyers in the mail. These flyers read, AK-47 coming to a school near you with photos of guns on them. No one had any idea who was doing this or what they could have had planned. It's not really the kind of situation you can take a chance on. So all the schools were filled with cops and they put very, very strict lockdown procedures in place. Thankfully, no one acted on the threats. Apparently, a little old lady was trying to scare everyone in the county into doing more for the gun control movement. She got in a lot of trouble.